There was a time, not very long ago, when America was known for its polluted rivers. They were foul, they were odoriferous, they even caught fire frequently. It seemed that every river community with a mill, and every river community had a mill, because it was water power that provided energy that drove that mill and to create jobs for the community, had stories to tell of how their river was the most polluted river. In communities that had paper mills, you could tell the color of the paper that was printed the night before by the color of the river in the morning. The same was true for those communities with textile mills. The river reflected the color of the dye that the cloth had been treated with the night before. And then there was the Blackstone, which carried the title of one of the most polluted rivers in the entire country. Dyes from textile mills, heavy poisonous metals from the metal, steel, and wire industries. And because no one cared about the river, every single community along the Blackstone River's route to Narragansett Bay and the ocean contributed their share of waste, garbage, and trash to make the Blackstone one of America's most unhealthy rivers. Oh, what happened here? Hi, I'm Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And something did happen here. Some people who really cared fought desperately hard to clean the river in their community. And this was before the environment was a political movement. This was before environmental laws were on the books. This was before we understood what an ecosystem was. This is before we were aware and understood the value and heritage of America's rivers. Some people with a grand vision, men and women, and youngsters too, decided to make a difference. And this is their story. So join me as we interview some ordinary folk who did extraordinary things in cleaning our Blackstone River. Before you can clean a river or the canal, you first need to discover them. Now, this part of the Blackstone River and Canal that runs from the Quinville section of Lincoln, Rhode Island, down past Martin Street to the Front Street, was an overgrown wonderland for 10-year-olds, but a place where most adults avoided at all costs. But it did manage to capture the imagination of two very different visionary men, Henry Tatro and David Rosser.
He was ordered, he had a heart operation. And by the way, that was one of the first heart operations that they ever had in this country. And he was ordered to take walks. And every day he had to get out and walk somewhere. So he used to walk along the Blackstone Canal, different sections of the canal. And he was walking one day in this section, and he thought it was so beautiful, and it was so close to Central Falls where it was so crowded, and when the contrast was so striking that he thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just keep it this way, keep this pristine area, a beautiful, natural, open space area. And so he came home, and I was doing my ironing and busy around the house trying to get the children ready for school for the next week and so forth. And he said, come on down and I'll show you a beautiful spot that we have here in Lincoln that I don't think anyone knows about. And so I left my work and I went down to see what he had in mind, and we walked all along the canal. And it really was beautiful, and I could appreciate it almost as much as he did. And it was his dream then to clean it up and keep it as a beautiful open space.
Well, I don't think there were a lot of people that really had a long a long distance view of what the river should be like. There were quite a few. Dave Rosser was probably the major one. He knew what would happen to that river eventually if things weren't done, and he was alone. I mean, there wasn't anybody to help him, and he did this all by himself, gaining the probably enmity of a lot of people by pointing out their deficiencies and what they were doing to the river. Dave knew the river like the back of his hand because he'd been fighting for clean river for years and years, and not very many people gave him much credit. He had I think his headquarters were in Pawtucket, if I remember, on the river, on a riverboat.
Then he organized the canal group, and we had our first meeting in my living room around the Christmas tree, and we thought of things that we had to do in order to make Henry's dream come true. And we incorporated the little group there. There were about 10 people. And then we had to think about publicity and about membership. And there were so many things that had to be done in order to get the corporation running. There was no environmental movement. People didn't care about the rivers and like that. It was just common knowledge that people would take things that they didn't want down to the river, throw them in the river, and forget about them. Then they left the cleanup for us.
Today, you look at the beautiful Blackstone River and the canal and the bikeway, and you wouldn't think twice about inviting the President of the United States and the First Lady to come here and visit the Blackstone Valley. But can you imagine back in 1967 having the audacity to invite Lady Bird Johnson and the President to come and visit Quinville? What were they thinking? Well, I'll tell you what, just goes to show you the tremendous vision of this small but very dedicated group of people. It was the 1960s, and the odds seemed insurmountable. On one side of the river was a huge Cumberland landfill. On the Lincoln side was a gravel operation that was digging right next to the historic Blackstone Canal, almost oblivious to the history. And there wasn't anyone to do anything about it except the Canal Group. That's the Committee for the Advancement of Natural Areas in Lincoln. Now, can you imagine in 1965 a housewife climbing up on top of a bulldozer to quiz the operator? Who do you work for, and why are you doing this?
Henry and a couple of other members of the group got into a boat, and they took pictures of the area. And then they went in to visit Mr. Ronci, who lived in Providence, and who owned the land. And they showed him the pictures, showed him how beautiful the area was, and told him what their idea was of saving that area as a park. He was convinced that it was a worthwhile project, and he would not only stop the operation that was going on, but he would give us a donation to get started and help us with our project.
The hard work of the Canal Group can be seen in the creation of the Blackstone River State Park. For the state park today is where the gravel operation was working in the 1960s. And it was on the land that the Ronci family donated to the state of Rhode Island. What about that horribly smelling landfill on the Cumberland side? That would be a much harder nut to crack. For each day, the operator of the landfill was supposed to cover everything that had been dumped. However,
but I guess he didn't do that too well because it was making a pretty bad stench, and the neighbors were complaining about the odors.
There were numerous lawsuits, different environmental groups, the Conservation Commission in Lincoln, certainly made the state aware, DEM aware of what was going on there. I remember we went in by foot, we've been chased out, we went down the river by canoe to take pictures of what was going on there. Actually, one time I rented a plane and took pictures from the air to show what was going on.
Now the Canal Group was tenacious. They documented all the destruction was taking place, and they tried everything they could to stop the dumping, but they kept running into a brick wall.
For years and years we tried to have that operation ceased, but nothing would happen. no matter what legal procedures we followed, we couldn't beat that Marshallkowski's lawyer. And he was told to stop the dumping in 1966. And he would stop it for a little while, and then he'd go back in again. And then he was told in 1969 to stop, and he stopped. And then later on, he'd go back again. And then we wanted the town to find out about the pollution of the water. Was that influencing the drinking water like that for the town of Lincoln and the town of Cumberland? We had 3 or 4 hearings, probably about a month apart, and they were in at the State House. And as the canal group, we went in to give witness as to what was happening out here. Finally, before the Department of Natural Resources declared that the dumping should be ceased. And then we thought the case was at the end because the Department of Natural Resources had told them to stop. But then the judge ruled that the Department of Natural Resources did not have authority to make them stop the dumping.
Remember, this was a time before environmental rules and before environmental regulations. It was time before people really cared about the world they lived in.
We organized a campaign, and we had so many people telephoning certain names that we would give them, and to have each person write to their congressman or their senators and ask that the wetlands bill be passed. And that was in 1971. All this time since 1965, we had been struggling with what to do to stop the dumping out there.
And finally, victory. For with the court's ruling that the Wetlands Act was constitutional, this would allow the Committee for the Advancement of Natural Areas in Lincoln to focus their attention on what was really important, the river.
Well, then we were free to work the canal in the Blackstone River the way we wanted to.
So the abuse of the river had been stopped thanks to the hard work of the canal group. But how do you clean up a river that's been abused for just about 200 years? Well, that's where ZAP comes in. ZAP. Where in the world did they come up with the term ZAP?
I have no idea. I think it was just a zap, meaning to get rid of all the trash and debris that was here.
Not many people knew really what ZAP meant, and then it came to be known that it meant to zap everything away, take everything out.
And I regret this to this day. One of the newsroom people, one of the reporters, came up to me and sat down. And he says, "Late," he says, "I got an idea." He says, "I think you ought to name this project that you're doing, this river cleanup along the Blackstone, ZAP." He says it's quick and easy, and it means to completely obliterate whatever is there. And I forget his name, and I would like to give him credit for the fact that he was the one that came in and suggested that we use the name ZAP for it, because I think it had something to do with the popularity of it.
It's a big, beautiful flowing river, and it could well enhance the quality of life for all those who live along its banks. But this river has problems. Well, the problems on the river are many and varied. It consists primarily of all types of polluted matter. The river is strewn with debris, thousands and thousands of truckloads of debris in the wetlands and in the floodplains all along its 51 miles. It is the result of neglect and pollution by industry and by municipalities and by the householders and by the plain citizens throughout this area for 150 years probably. And the question arises as to what we're going to do about these problems. Operation ZAP is an attempt to clean up the litter and the debris from along the 51 miles of this beautiful river.
It all started when I read this account, a very small account, of Bill Sears in Massachusetts who had cleaned up a small river. And I thought, my gosh, that sounds like a pretty good idea and something that we could do here at the newspaper. So I called Bill Sears and talked to him about it at length. And he said, yeah, it's not that difficult. It can be done. You do a little organizing and get people together, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of help. And that's where it started. I then went to the publisher at the time, who was Mike Metcalf, of course. I knew Mike very well, a good friend of mine. Mike, unfortunately, is now dead. And I said, Mike, this is something we could do, and it would tie in very well with Bob Frederickson's series on our dirty water, because we'd be cleaning up part of our dirty water. And Mike said, go ahead and do it. We'll pay all the expenses, which happened.
Well, that was all in the planning. It was like planning a war. You had to have certain people here and certain people here, and you had to plan the strategy. Each chairman had to plan the strategy for his own section. And you had your workers and your food coming at a certain time, and water and soda coming through at a certain time. Everything was just a matter of logistics. Everything, the people and the work to be done, they knew exactly what they had to do.
But it helped a lot to have a newspaper, because whenever we had a date or a time or a method of doing things, it was published in the paper. And people up and down the river evidently followed the paper quite closely, because the circulation was very good along the Blackstone River. And people followed it. I think there were a lot of people who were just beginning to realize at the time what the environment entailed. We had a reporter that was assigned to the job of ZAP from the beginning, and he covered that every day. But day by day, the Providence Journal covered everything that was going on in the assemblage of the final ZAP day. We got help from an amazing number of people. We got trucks. We had over 300 trucks donated. The use of 300 trucks donated, a driver and a truck to pick up the debris.
They divided this river up into sections and named each section after a certain fish. And I had the hornpout section, which ran from Front Street to the Ashton Dam. And first we had to go along and find out just what trash there was and where it was, and we marked the number of the pole where the trash was, and we got everything all laid out. We had 10 or 15 meetings before the final day came, and we got out there to do the work. And there was so much equipment, so much heavy equipment, bulldozers, and then they had the rakes and the shovels and the forks and the bags, and for the people who couldn't do the heavy lifting. And there were many, many young boys and girls who were interested in getting into the act. It was like a circus for the children, and everybody was in a good mood. And of course, when the food came, they were in a better mood.
Broadcasting live at WICE with Bob Hollins here, 2:30, and we're broadcasting from the banks of the Blackstone River in Pawtucket. We'd like you to come on down near the Slater.
Oh, how time flies. 30 years ago, I was here on the banks of the Blackstone, just in 7th grade, here in Pawtucket, and wanting to always be involved in everything that was offered in the community. And they had a program that was being offered called ZAP the Blackstone. And what really interested me was that the Providence Journal had a lot of coverage. And I remember reading the papers saying, you know, inviting people in the community to come out and help zap the Blackstone. And surprising to no one, I got involved. One of the memories that sticks out in my mind of how I participated is that even though I was a young girl, I became part of a chain here on the banks of the Blackstone. There was so much debris and trash and tires and shopping carts that I became part of a chain that we passed debris up. And we just kept passing and passing up, and at the top of the street here on the corner of Exchange and Roosevelt was large heavy machinery that other folks were loading it in and taking it away. And I remember the energy was high. There was a lot of things happening, not only here, but up and down the Blackstone. We were put right to work and we worked. And as the day progressed, we were given refreshments and we were given lunch, and I believe it was supposed to end mid-afternoon. But we all seen that there still needed work to be done, and I remember my dad coming down to pick me up to bring me home, and me telling him I wasn't ready to come home yet, and him coming back to get me several hours later.
And I kept in close touch a couple of weeks before with the Weather Bureau. And early in the morning, I called them up as soon as they were open. I called up the Weather Bureau in Providence, and I said, "What's the tornado thing?" He said, "We're going to get it this afternoon." I said, "Well, gee, maybe we better call off ZAP." He said, "No, don't do that, because there's a chance that it will not amount to very much." And fortunately, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we had a sprinkle. It just wet the ground. The Navy gave me a helicopter, and I flew all over, up and down the river all day in a helicopter, stopping at the critical points. And
contributions have come in. They've come in at a rate that it surprised me, and I think it's probably surprised all of you. Contributions of food and money, not to speak of the equipment and actual volunteer labor help. We have worked with many of the organizations around the state in getting heavy equipment, and we're very happy at the results we have had. They have all given us unstintingly of both the equipment and time. The unions have given us volunteer help to man all of the equipment that the contractors have agreed to provide for us, and I think we're in reasonably good shape as far as heavy equipment and equipment of any kind goes.
The big trees, it was quite a task to get them out, and they had to have special equipment. And one of the pictures shows helicopter helping them with this great big rope that was tied around a dead stump, and the helicopter was dragging it out. And it's quite a technique that they had to think up.
The actual day was like the invasion of Normandy. There were so many contractors and consultants and volunteers that were coming out of every part of Rhode Island and coming to the river. Traffic was a mess. There were bulldozers and trailer trucks and National Guard all competing for the same space. It was a terrific day. There was so much going on. And with everybody volunteering their time, everything seemed to go fast. Everybody was rushing along to get as much done as possible. And so you could have a vision of these backhoes and front-end loaders racing around the site like some speeded up movie, trying to accomplish in one day which would might normally take 6 months.
we had hard hats that we gave off to a lot of people with the word ZAP on it, and that was, you know, visually it looked pretty good.
Major one that remains is the problem of solid waste disposal. Where are we going to put all this debris?
Well, I can remember is, you know, you would have a coordinator sending people to different sections. You would have whatever number of people in the group cleaning the section, and you'd be, you know, a lot of this was overgrown. If you look at the riverbank, it's still kind of overgrown, but to go in there and clean out tires and things, you'd get pretty dirty. Some of the amount of debris was incredible. I know that one of the Boy Scouts did a project down by the Kelly House a little bit north of here, and I believe they filled about 2 dumpsters full of debris, and it's just amazing all the stuff that was in there. It's you know, when you look at it now, I don't think people realize what was here before, but it was a lot of fun because there's some camaraderie. Everybody's doing the same activity, and you know, sharing on what they're doing, and we would usually have refreshments donated, and people had a good time, and you feel like you're accomplishing something. And as you can see by the path, I guess we have.
A lot of it was done by children. A lot of kids showed up. Thinking of it now, I'm kind of surprised that so many children did show up on the banks, and the pictures here show that there were, you know, kids from 8, 9, 10, 12 on up to adults that showed up to work on the river.
And ZAP, largely because of the pressure or the exposure that the Providence Journal gave it, became a true statewide effort with people from all walks of life and all interests participating. The camaraderie was extraordinary. The day of ZAP, there was no hierarchy of who did what and who helped whom and who bossed whom. It was just everybody working as hard as they could to get as much done as possible, and staying out of each other's way so that work could be accomplished.
All you have to do is give people an opportunity to do it, and they are overjoyed to be able to do this, just to be given the opportunity to do it.
It's just wonderful that we could join together. There were just a few, but we had such an interest in the canal, in the water, in the beauty of what was in our little town, and which was being neglected. I know my husband would just be amazed. He worked so hard. He put his whole heart and soul into that Blackstone River, and to see that the fruits of his labor have finally ripened.
These were ordinary folks. They were your neighbors, unassuming people who just had the fire in their belly to make a difference. And 30 years later, this is what their legacy looks like. Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And it's clear that we enjoy a legacy of a much cleaner river today thanks to the vision, the persistence, the incredible amount of hard work, and the belief that the Blackstone River was worth saving by a very small group of people. And look what the river is like today. Why, people are fishing and canoeing up and down the river. They're biking and strolling along its riverbanks. Matter of fact, people are even buying condos to be closer to the river. Imagine that. And all because a few people had had enough. And they were going to make a difference. They were going to change the way things were. So thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Leighton. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Will. And thank you, all 10,000 of you Rhode Islanders who came down to Blackstone River in 1972 to make a difference. Now, folks, it's our turn. Today, we look in the river and it's got great potential. But 30 years from now, what will be the legacy that we will leave to our children about the health of our planet and the health of our river? It's up to us. So until next time, hope to see you on the river.